Hey guys, welcome. My name is Nina Means, the director for Austin Community College Fashion Incubator, and you're watching ACCFI Presents. We are here with Matt Swinney of Fashion by Events, an incredible platform, business, Fashion Week mega system that has really taken Texas for the last, I would say, 11, 12 years. Matt, you've been building
12. Yeah.
12 years now of doing fashion by events. And, from Dallas to Houston to Austin, if you do fashion shows in this area, you've pretty much done them all with Matt. So Matt, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're so glad to have you here. There have been so many changes with what's been going on in the fashion world in the last 6 to 8 months here,
Just a
but
little bit.
just a little
Just a
bit of
little
something
bit.
happening. Yeah, no, exactly. So but one of the things that I'm always really interested in having the conversation with our local industry, talking about the things that you've been doing with fashion by events. I mean, you've really kind of cut some trail and done some things that have been kind of against the grain in the typical fashion world. And yet now, as things have changed and accelerated with the global pandemic, now kind of the fashion world's turning back and looking to you. So, I wanted to have that conversation with you just to kind of let's let the groundwork a little bit about what's been done in the past. Like where did Fashion by Events start, and how are you different from what was happening in the kind of the general populace of the fashion industry?
Yeah, so we started 2009 with Austin Fashion Week. That was the very first one, and I we called it Fashion Week, but the reality it wasn't really that, right? Like at the end of the day, we weren't going after buyers, wholesale retail buyers. The reality that we learned very early on is that those people are not going to travel, and they don't have the budgets to come to Austin, Texas, right? They just don't. They're going to do everything in New York. They're going to do everything in LA. They're going to do everything overseas. And I guess I kind of looked at it as a why do we most smaller designers don't care about that group anyway, or they shouldn't, not
Mhm.
yet. Like at some point in their careers they should, but when they're really young and just starting out their labels, the reality is they probably couldn't fulfill those orders anyway. And so
True.
to me, it's more about building consumer base. And so it's funny, from the very beginning, we always viewed it as, hey, don't you want to sell something to that woman sitting in the audience? Like, literally, like Nina sitting in the audience falls in love with a dress and then you can buy it, right? Like, to me, that direct to consumer model was sort of where we started. And funny enough, that's exactly where the bigger fashion weeks have gone. I mean, let's be realistic. In an online world, pre-COVID, doesn't really matter. A buyer doesn't need to show up at a runway show to determine what they're going to buy, right? Those orders have been placed anyway. And frankly, runway shows have just become, from a New York Fashion Week perspective, they're really just a billboard advertisement anyway. It's just a marketing plan. It's not really about selling clothes. And for us, we've always wanted it to be about selling clothes. And that's been really hard. How do you that's always been the big question, right? How do you translate what somebody sees on the runway to an actual sale? And so, funny enough, I think, I'm sure we'll get into it, but funny enough, I think COVID has actually potentially helped that scenario.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that, to your point, the direct to consumer component that, you've always had as a part of your experience, the galleries, I think, was always a part of
Hmm.
the fashion events as well. So not only were people able to sit and watch the shows, but they also had that gallery experience. Could you talk a little bit about that too? Like how
Yeah, so
you had that layered in?
it's essentially just little pop-up shops right inside a runway show experience. And so I definitely come at the side, from the business side. I come at it from a runway show should be fun. So it's an entertainment experience as much as anything. And when I first said that back in 2009, 10, 11, those early years, a lot of designers honestly looked down their nose at me. Like, it's not about entertainment, it's about helping my brand. Okay, yes, but and my response was always yes, but your brand is helped by people being entertained. If they're having fun, then then they have that experience that then they relate back to your brand and yada yada yada. And I think now that seems so obvious, but
Mhm.
back 10 years ago it wasn't as obvious
Mhm.
because, and maybe it's because we called it Fashion Week.
Mhm.
Maybe if we had called it something else, people would have had a different level of expectation. And so for me, it was always about, how do you let people have fun? A fashion show, literally for one designer, might only last 4 or 5 minutes, right? And so if
Mhm.
that's the case, like I got to build an entire show where people are having fun, ticket buyers are having fun for 2 or 3 hours. And if
Mhm.
that's the case, how do you do that? And
Mhm.
one of the ways we did it was through these sort of pop-up shop ideas that you could kind of shop collections, you could shop accessories, you could, kind of wander around with drink in hand in a much
Mhm.
more festive environment than, let's say, like, sort of a bazaar or something like that. It kind of looks
Right.
like that, but,
Right.
it's not on a Saturday morning, kind of wandering around, shopping. It doesn't, kind of like a cool mall, I guess, but with cocktails.
Yeah, well, if only they would sell the cocktails at the mall, then maybe the mall would be in a different space, right?
That's right. Well, I
Yeah,
mean, exactly. People would shop more. I
yeah,
can tell you for a fact that
absolutely.
when people have more cocktails, they do spend more money.
Yes, we've actually seen this phenomenon take shape in a variety of different places.
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
no, for sure. I know I would go to market in Dallas, and there would definitely be some bubbly going on and a lot more shopping happening with the buyers. But you're right. In that direct to consumer space, it's like, the entire vibe kind of inspires the retail experience. And I think that that's something that has been unique to what you've been able to create with Fashion by Events. Probably a bit before its time, right? We really hadn't had that experience in other fashion shows, particularly for the editors or the bloggers, or maybe a few of the department stores would show up to do those kinds of meetings ahead of time, kind of pre-shopping before the actual market began. But you're right, it's not been so much about the entertainment factor for the direct consumer experience, maybe until really until you brought that to the table, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think maybe some other people were doing that. I honestly don't know. 12
Mhm.
years ago, it was so fragmented, and now more of us who run regional fashion weeks know each other. And we certainly have bounced some ideas off of each other. But I think as a general rule, people did not. And so dirty little secret. I've never been to New York Fashion Week. I've never really had an interest. I mean, to be honest, like when you produce fashion shows for a living, kind of the last thing you want to do is go to somebody else's fashion show. That's no knock on anyone else. It's just like, I mean, it's
I've
like
had
going to
enough.
work for me. Yeah, it's like going to work for me. It's not that fun.
Yes,
So,
yes,
um, so
understood.
it wasn't by design that I didn't go. It's just that I didn't think there was anything I could necessarily learn. And maybe that sounds super pompous, but it wasn't that. It was more just like I feel like I have a way that I want this to be done, and whether they do it like that or not really doesn't matter to me. And I
Mhm,
later found out sort of that, like, that's not how it's done.
mhm,
And so I guess I was bucking the trend without really meaning to buck the trend. Like, it wasn't an intentional thing. I hadn't
mhm,
done a whole lot of research on sort of what a fashion week is supposed to look like. And now I'm glad I didn't, because
mhm,
I fear that maybe I would have just gone down this, well, this is what it's supposed to look like, therefore do
mhm.
it like this.
Right.
And honestly, the big fashion weeks of the world are failing. So,
Yeah,
so
these are changing drastically.
yeah. Right. And funny enough, like, they've come back to, it's all about a media play now. And for us, it was always a media play. Like, that's what it
Mhm,
was from the beginning.
mhm,
Because we needed media to be able to then sell tickets, to then bring in the consumers who would then buy from the designers. Right. So
mhm,
it's this sort of constant trickle down effect. And
mhm,
I don't know, maybe we were being super innovative back then. It didn't feel like it at the time. It just felt obvious to me, I guess.
mhm.
And now I think it's so funny that, New York Fashion Week especially is completely about influencers, right? So
Yeah.
it's all about, who's gonna, which Instagram influencers are gonna be there. And to me, that feels like a bubble. And I
Mhm,
don't see how that at the end of the day is going to really impact brands long term, or that it's a
mhm.
sustainable model, right? I mean, at some
Right.
point, to me, it always has to come back to the consumer. Without the consumer, you don't exist as a brand.
It's
That's it.
absolutely true. It's so true. And I think that the challenge is that sometimes people don't take the opportunities to invest in their consumer and discovering their consumer. And so, one of the things that I actually enjoyed about your audience was that you got a lot of different kinds of people in the room at the same time. And I feel like that's something that's a bit unique to your events. I wanted to kind of explore that with you a little bit because I know that's something that is kind of a hallmark of what you do with Fashion by Events. Can you kind of talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah, it was a happy accident, if I'm being totally honest. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, fashion. What I love about fashion as an event, and from a kind of entertainment and promotion side, is that at the end of the day, like, fashion has always been, and one of the things we were trying to break was fashion has always felt super exclusive, right? Like, New York Fashion Week, you have to be invited to the shows. Well, I don't like that. Like, that just bothers me. Maybe because I wasn't always invited to every party as a kid or whatever. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
to me, like, I just don't see the value in that. Like, when you immediately put a limit on who is available to attend based on who they know, then you've completely alienated a huge group of people who may want to give you their money, right? Like, and at the end of the day, like, if you just boil it down to that simple fact, then
Mm-hmm.
a lot of this becomes super obvious to me. So
Mm-hmm.
for us, you still have to buy a ticket. So yes, there is some investment that somebody has to make, which does immediately limit some audience, right? And so I will fully admit that. But we talk about ticket prices from a 25, talking about physical events at least, a $25 standing room ticket up to a $250 front row seat. And so you're really talking about a huge group of people, across various platforms and various socioeconomic status and everything else that can come into the room. So
Mm-hmm.
to me, it's not just about, as you said, it's not just about that woman sitting on the front row who
Mm-hmm.
may be the best potential consumer for those designers, but maybe she's not. You never know who's sitting on the back row. You never know who just bought a random seat. And to me, because fashion, if allowed to be, is ubiquitous, right? We all put on pants every day. I mean, these days we only put on joggers, but we all, in theory, put on pants every day, at least when
In
we were going
theory,
places, right?
yes.
But I've always said, fashion shouldn't be exclusive, right? From the day you go to kindergarten and you're picking out your first day of school clothes, you're saying something about who you are, right?
Yeah.
And some people don't care about that, and that's okay, but a huge group of people do care about that, and they
Mm-hmm.
come from all types of backgrounds. And I think from a physical event perspective, one of the things I've always been most proud of. So my wife Kara and I, we go to a bunch of galas in town, a lot of charity events, and basically you see the same people over and over and over again. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's always the same group. And when you come to our shows, I feel like it's the one time, at least in Austin, and actually Dallas and Houston too, for that matter, it's the one time where you're going to see, kind of very high end, luxury driven, women in the same event with, purple streaked hair, tattooed, East Side, hairstylist in the same
Right.
room, and everybody's treated the same, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and I think it does make for this really unique audience and really diverse audience. And
Mm-hmm.
we don't have to get into this, but, like, in
Mm-hmm.
Austin, most events are not very ethnically diverse. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
ours really are.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, every color under the rainbow is
Mm-hmm.
there and represented. It's you have a lot of the LGBTQ community there, and I
Mm-hmm.
just I just find that it's this, and I think that's what adds to sort of the experience, right? Like, everybody wants to be in a room in an event where it's great people watching, and it's great kind of being around people that you don't see every single day, and meeting new people. And I think in fashion we tend to be pretty gregarious, and that's been part of it. And I think, I think when you have that type of audience, again, it goes back to that overall experience. It's fun, right? You're
Right.
around people you don't see all the time, and I think that it creates this kind of sense of, what's on the runway being even more special, right? Like
Right.
the whole thing kind of coming together, I think is important.
Absolutely. I actually really love that you kind of leaned into, the opportunities across the inclusivity spectrum as well as diversity and how important that is, especially in our, current state of things from a cultural dialogue. Whenever you move from, because I really do want to spend some time talking about kind of the shifts that have happened through the pandemic. This year has really kind of been, I mean, truly, I feel like we're living through a moment of history, right? This has really been cataclysmic on so many levels, from, the global pandemic to the cultural movements across the world. And then this shift virtually and kind of accelerating our, technology use in the industry. This will be that moment in time when we'll remember 2020 changed a lot of things for us, the way that we operate. So for you, kind of in light of all of these multifaceted changes that are happening, can you talk a little bit about, like, kind of as you guys have gone from, these beautiful live physical events, that have been inclusive and diverse, what that's looked like kind of shifting into these virtual spaces. And, there's so many questions. I'm going to just kind of leave it right there. Why don't we just talk about kind of that shift into moving virtual and some of the things that we're learning?
Yeah, I mean, I think going to your sort of point of what 2020 is, it sounds so big, but I think we're at a point in time where we kind of globally are deciding what we want to be when we grow up, right?
I would
Like,
agree with that.
who do we want to be as a society? Who do we want to be as, you know, people working with other people? And I think technology has separated us a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, 10 years ago, you and I could not have had this conversation like this.
True.
And so, how fast technology has moved, I think, has divided us as people a lot, right? It's easy to be a keyboard warrior on Facebook yelling at your crazy uncle, right?
Okay.
And but things that you wouldn't necessarily say to somebody's face. And so, I think that division has really been amplified during all of this. And like, I don't know if it's like this karmic shift or whatever it is, but like at some point now I think we're facing the music of that, of okay, what do we really want to become? And are we just gonna, let our planet die off and this is how we're gonna be? Or are we
Mm-hmm.
going to like actually take steps to come back together and, create a better society than we had before? And so
Mm-hmm.
I know that's kind of waxing big and waxing poetic, but to me, like
It's where we
distilling,
are.
yeah, but distilling that down into how can I help shift a conversation? Just me, right? I can only control
Mm-hmm.
me. I can't control anybody else. And so to me, like what we have done is we've sort of built this audience, we've built this platform, and we've built this, ability over the last 12 years. And I love fashion designers. Like I love working with them. I am not one, I can't sew a button on a shirt, but like maybe that's one of the reasons I love them so much. My daughter is coming into her own as a
Sadie is
fashion
very
designer,
talented.
and like I'm blown away by that because I can't do the things she does. And to me, I love that group of people and I want to help them in whatever way I can. And so this sort of idea of, okay, so if we're in the middle of COVID and we're having this cultural shift and all of this, what do you do to try to keep that conversation moving forward? Forget about my business for a second, which isn't fun, to run in the middle of all this. I run live events, for God's sake. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's not good. Like that's not where
Yeah.
you want to be right now. So,
Yeah.
so the way I tried to view it was, yes, you can go virtual, but what does that mean, right? Like, what does that, how do you really do that? And so,
Mm-hmm.
for us, it was about, we created 3 shows, for anyone who doesn't know: Fashion by Texas, Fashion by Black Designers, and Fashion by Global. And the idea was, if you're going to be virtual anyway, why don't you just expand your audience? Because
Mm-hmm.
you're literally not limited by anything except for internet access at this point, right?
True.
So anywhere in the world, right? And so that was sort of the crux. And then if you go even culturally further, that was the idea of the Black Designers Show. Like it felt like a moment in time where we needed to raise our hands and say, we're going to be an advocate, and we understand that maybe Black designers in America are going through things that maybe designers not of color don't have to go through. And by the way, the vast majority of designers who are not of color also understand this, right? And so to me, it was this idea of like kind of throwing everything into one basket that I
Mhm.
wanted to say personally,
Yeah,
and doing it through the platform that we best understand, which is fashion
absolutely.
shows.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, we did this series of 3 shows, and it really honestly was just a test. Like, hey, this doesn't cost hardly anything. Let's get some
Mhm.
people together. Like, so some of it was shot live, like we did an actual show in
Mhm.
the middle of the Domain. Thank you, the Domain, for for giving us some
Yes,
space. And
I saw that. That was incredible.
it's crazy, right? So there's literally just people wandering around the Domain, and here we are having this like basically pop-up fashion show all day, you know, and it's all
Mhm.
done through video. And then we did live shows that kind of replayed all of that with me interjected in the middle of it. And you know, it really just became, look, this is the easy way to do it. Let's
Mhm.
see what it looks like.
Mhm.
Um, it looked pretty good. I mean, like
Mhm.
I was very proud of it. You know,
Yes.
it got decent viewership.
Mhm.
Um, and so, you know, to me, like that was the test. Like, do people care about fashion shows on a screen? And the
Mhm.
answer I think we came away with was they do.
Yeah.
But in a perfect world, there would be some combination of being able to physically go to the show and then also have the opportunity to watch it on a screen. And so I think that's probably where we go from here, is what that hybrid sort of model looks like.
Absolutely.
But in the meantime, if you love fashion and you can't physically be at it, this is a way to do it, right? And
Mhm.
funny enough, I actually think, you know, when I said that I think COVID has created some easier ways for consumers, I do think that's true, right? So if I'm watching a
Mhm.
show on my screen. So if you're watching it live in real life, in physically, how do I now? Okay, so I saw a dress walk down the runway. Okay, how do I buy that? Well, I don't know. Like, am I like looking on my phone, like, you know, trying to find
Mhm.
a website or an Instagram feed or whatever? It's hard, like creating that one to. And oh, by the way, there goes another dress. So like,
Yes.
I already forgot what I was doing, right? Because I'm
Right.
interested in the show,
I wanna see the show and I wanna be able to shop at the same time.
which is very difficult to do.
Mhm.
And as a promoter, it's really hard to do because I kind of want your eyeballs on the show.
Right.
So there's not a whole lot of incentive to push you. You want people to go shop afterwards, and
Mhm.
that's really hard because again, cocktails, and they forget
Mhm.
what they were doing, and they don't remember the dress, or they got to flip back through
Right.
their phone to find a picture of it or whatever. But
Mhm.
digitally and virtually, okay, so I can watch it on YouTube, and I can literally like click while I'm in the middle of YouTube, right? Like I can click
Mhm.
to that person's website. It's in the comments. Like
Right.
I can go straight there. I can Google them. I can look them up. I can go
That's
to
awesome.
multiple websites. I can learn things about them. And
Right.
I just think I think that's a huge value.
I would agree.
And I think, you know, for us going forward, we talked about this a little bit before we came on. I think, you know, we're looking at more episodic types of shows, meaning,
Mhm.
you know, yes, there will be a runway show, but what can we tell the viewer about the designer? What can we tell them about model selection? What can can we peel back the layers of the onion, you know, across an entire week of content, you know, that then culminates in a fashion show,
Yes.
so that you feel in love with that designer before you've even seen their show, and it builds that anticipation so that hopefully it leads to actual sales for them, and not just sales. I think that's part of it too. I think one of the beauties of buying from a local designer or an emerging designer or whatever words you want to use on that,
Mhm.
I think one of the beauties of it is that like Kara, my wife, owns a Nina Means piece, right? And
Mhm.
so, and she loves it. And part of the reason she loves it is because we're friends and she knows you.
Mhm.
And there's a whole lot of difference in buying something off the rack versus buying it from somebody who you got to meet, who you got
Yeah.
to talk to, who you know worked really hard to create that piece for them. Um,
Mhm.
whether it was manufactured or sewn by hand or whatever, it doesn't really matter. The reality is it's kind of that person's dream coming to life on a customer. And I think fashion designer Nina, if I can put words into your mouth for a second, would say that from a business side, the most rewarding thing you probably ever do is see your clothes on another human being, right?
Yes,
Like that they cared
100%.
enough to buy it and be involved and want to wear you, right? It's
Hmm.
literally you on them, your soul
Right.
and your spirit. And so to me, like that's a lot of what we can sell here. And virtually it's just an easier connection to make
Hmm.
than physically, honestly.
Absolutely. I actually really love the fact that, like, in this space, it actually, when you're really telling the full story of how technology really becomes much more personal. And I think that that's always been the struggle, with fashion integrating technology throughout its value chain is like, hey, it's making you more precise, it's helping you to deliver the right product to the customer. But in this space where it's like about the virtual experience and connecting to the brand and telling the stories, now it's actually giving you a window in that you may not have gotten in that one moment for the 3 to 5 minutes that you saw them on the runway. I mean, this is a much longer hello than you get, in the other space.
Well, and I think in the physical space, you never even really get the hello, right? Like you
True.
just see the collection, and then, and funny enough, like it's not like the designer comes out first; they come
True.
out at the end, right? And so you have
Hmm.
no idea who that person is
Hmm.
until they walk out at the end, and by that point, the collection's already gone. And
Hmm.
so, to me, this is a way to flip that script where you get to know the designer before you even see a piece of their clothing. And I think I think you watch that show now with such a deeper intent and deeper meaning. And when you know what to look for, because I think
Hmm.
that's part of it too. And also in a physical show, the designer never says a word, right?
Right.
Like they just walk out and wave and that's it. And I mean, and at
Yeah,
least most of the time, right?
exactly.
And so if that's the case, you really don't know anything. And so you're inferring whatever you want to infer as a
Hmm.
consumer about their collection. And I
Right.
think I think this idea of, if you really can like almost build this like week long episode about this designer that then culminates in a show, then when you watch that show and you've already learned about some of the inspirations and maybe a little bit about that designer and where they came from and their story, then all of a
Hmm.
sudden you start to see that in the clothing.
Yeah.
And I think, I it's been hard for me to understand that with physical shows, because
Hmm.
I do get to know each designer a little bit. I read their bios, I edit their bios, let's be honest, before they go on to a website or whatever. And
Right.
so I get to know them. I know what their music is going to be in advance. Like I get to
Hmm.
know them on a deeper level than any person in the audience gets
Hmm.
to. And so when I see their collection walk, I have an upper hand, right? Like I
Hmm.
already know something. And so like to me, I've always tried to figure out, well, how can I take the way I get to see a show with the designers we work with? How can I help other people get to see a show in the same way that I get to see it? Because
Right.
I have an unfair advantage,
Hmm.
because I get to know them so much in advance. Well, here is a way that you get to see the show in the same way that I do, right? You get to
Right.
see it because you got all of the lead up, and honestly, it's even better
Right.
because I'm gonna learn things through those episodes that I didn't know about that designer too. And so I don't know, like I don't know what the future of fashion shows looks like, but I think it looks something like that.
Well, I am personally going to be watching. I can't wait for this show to come on. I was like, when does this
I know, me
happen? When
too.
does this go? Yeah, you're like, when's
I
it
really want to see
started?
what this looks like.
I can't wait for this to get started. This sounds like the show of dreams, Like I think that and to do it with emerging talent, I know that we've had different shows like on Netflix or Project Runway and things like that, and they will do like this entire season of shows around a handful of designers. But what I like about this format is that it really gives you kind of a place to go to, it's the brand story up to the purchase, and so there's a clear destination, kind of, a journey of sorts, for the viewer. So if you're looking for emerging brands or you're wanting to do something that's a little bit different and outside of the box, I think that's a huge Austin value. We love indie. around here. We don't want to look and do everything exactly the way everyone else is always doing it. I think it's a huge strength of Austin's. And I think it's really, a testament of your strengths as well, is that you're like, I never built it in the box. I built it my way, and I think that that's definitely a hallmark of Austin as a city, but it's also, I think, just kind of a hallmark of the way that you built your business.
Yeah. It's again, it wasn't intentional. It just, maybe it's just who I am. I grew up in
Mm-hmm.
Austin, and so I kind of grew up with that sort of set of values, and I grew up entrepreneurial. And I guess, to me, entrepreneurial means get outside the box anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's never intentional. Like, it's sort of this, well, what if you do it like this? I mean, it's not to intentionally buck the system. It's just to look, if everyone's just going to create the same thing that everyone else already created, what's the point? Like, to me, you're just following somebody else, and I'm not doing this to lead anybody. It's really trying to view it through the lens of, how do you make a lot of different stakeholders in a fashion show happy?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the part that I think is really difficult, right? Because you have sponsors, you have the designer, you have models, you have a hair and makeup team, you have the consumer, you have the person sitting, you have the photographer at the end of the runway, and all of those pieces matter, and they have to come together in this sort of symbiotic environment. And to try to do that and make sure that everyone gets what they need out of it is not easy. And so you sort of have to look at it from a, well, is this may be great for designer, is it great for model?
Mm-hmm.
And if the answer to that is no, then you need to go back to the drawing board, right? And
Wow.
so at
Yeah.
some point you have to make sure that each of those pieces is going to walk away with a big smile on their face.
Absolutely. Matt, I feel like, okay, these 30 minutes go by
Super
entirely too
fast, right?
fast. Yeah, I was like, how are we already finished? We're done.
Yeah.
But I think that we should definitely schedule a time to do kind of a longer format conversation, because there's still so much to talk about. And I would love to kind of do a multi-part series with you
Yeah.
on some of the things that are going on. That's something that we're wanting to move toward ourselves in terms of how we're, doing these conversations with our local industry. But you've really been really a foundational, hallmark of the fashion industry here in Austin. And so we really appreciate you coming on to talk with me for ACCFI Presents today.
Thank you. I love you, Nina.
We love you too. Like, seriously, we're looking forward to all the exciting things we've got cooked up. We've got we've got a few irons in the fire with Matt, and so there's some really great opportunities that we have here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and close out here. Guys, we're so glad that you're able to join us for ACCFI Presents. Again, my name is Nina Means, the director here for Austin Community College Fashion Incubator. If you want to check us out on our handles, we definitely would love for you to see you on social. We're at ACC Fashion Incubator on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And you can find us at ACC Fashion Incube on Twitter. If you haven't joined our listserv or subscribed to our channel, definitely hit the bell. And also check us out at fashion.incubator at austincc.edu. So again, Matt, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have
Thank you.
you. And we look forward to sharing with you guys here very soon about all the exciting projects we've got coming up with Fashion by Events and Matt Swinney. All right, take care. All right, we're